Welcome back to Stay Tuned Live, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's officially summer as of yesterday, so we're back into the summer reading series. I haven't done one of these in a little while, and it's really great to have you here. I'm your host tonight, Phil Machi, and I've got a pretty awesome show lined up for you. You know, when people think about Disney animation, they tend to fondly remember their Renaissance periods. The earliest one, of course, and then in the early days of Snow White, and then of course later in the '90s with Aladdin and Little Mermaid and all those great films. But things weren't always happily ever after, and tonight we're going to take a look at the Disney Dark Ages. My special guest is a former Disney director and screenwriter, and he has a new book coming out this September about the 20-year period in which Disney's history nearly took a completely end-of-life term for them. So we're going to talk about that and how, of course, they emerged, and, of course, the new book as well. So I'm so happy now to welcome Steve Anderson.
Hey, Phil.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yes, you too. And I hope that everybody watching tonight gets, learns some things. I think it's a pretty exciting, subject matter. And please, of course, stick around for the end. I understand you're going to stick around so we can do a little bit of Q&A with the audience, right?
Yep, I'll be here.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, I'm beyond excited for this because I have to say, when I started reading the book, and we're going to get to the book more in detail in a few minutes. I just want to say right off the bat, I was reading the book and I thought, okay, well, here's somebody that wrote a book that is exactly made for me. So this, first of all, kudos to you for doing that, because I find that over the years I've had a lot of questions about the periods of time that we don't really hear a lot about. And I'm like, I wish I just had a resource I could go to and, quickly page through it and figure out what was going on during that time. And you've officially done that.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. I do want to point out to folks watching, if they aren't familiar with some of your work, you were a screenwriter. You worked on films like The Emperor's New Groove, and then you directed well, at this point in time, because this might change later, but in 2011, they brought out Winnie the Pooh, which was the final traditionally animated film that went to theaters, right?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe that still stands as Disney feature animation's last 2D movie, 2011's Winnie the Pooh. But there you go. But I agree with you. I think I know something new will come along at some point, and I hope so, because that's not a legacy I want to maintain. We need more 2D animation out there. So.
I agree, but you directed that film, so that's important to point out.
Yep. And I directed it with myself and my good friend and colleague Don Hall, who also directed Big Hero 6.
Okay, great.
We partnered on that film and had a blast making that.
Well, and I want to, again, I'm going to get to the book here in a little bit, but what I wanted to do, just to give people a little bit of, just set the stage a little bit, because you mentioned you directed Winnie the Pooh with another individual, and that's something that I think is worth pointing out. Mm-hmm. I don't know when that tradition started exactly off the top of my head, but Disney has this tendency to have two directors on a film, right?
Yeah, I mean there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, there's usually multiple directors. So even back to Walt's time, he had sometimes two, sometimes three directors on. I believe films like Sleeping Beauty had three directors. Right. I've always been told that because animation is such a huge beast to wrangle, and there's so many people, so many departments, just so many moving parts to deal with, that the feeling is always that two heads are better than one, and sometimes the directors, it all depends on the team. Some directing teams will split up the movie, like you take this half of the movie and I'll take this half of the movie, and then obviously we'll compare notes and share ideas, but we're going to split it up. Don and I decided we're not going to do that. We're going to make the movie together. So we were together in every step of the way, at every department, at every meeting, just because we thought that's how we like to work, and it made the most sense to us.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question that I don't think it was covered in the book,
Okay.
but I've wondered it. You kind of like broached the subject a little bit, talking about the package films of the 40s.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so something I've been, and for those of you folks watching who are maybe curious when I say package films, there were a collection of films that were released in the theater, and they weren't a complete single narrative. It was a bunch of little narratives, and that was done as a cost-saving method. But the question I have for you, maybe you have the answer, is if animation is already broken down into smaller pieces to make it more manageable, how is a package film somehow more affordable to make than a big narrative that is already being broken down?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I do have the answer to that. I'm trying to think, because I'm with you. Like, each of those films, in those package films, they could each sort of be considered a sequence in a longer format film.
Yes.
It may have added up to a shorter runtime, so that may have helped reduce the costs. It's possible that those films were just produced on a smaller budget as well, like each of those shorts. It's also possible that they may have been. I should. Hopefully, I'm not speaking out of school here, but they may not have all been made all at once. They may have been some shorts that began earlier, and then some shorts that they started right here, and so they gathered them up, and they were at various stages of production, as opposed to we made them all at once, like one big movie. So it's also possible that they kind of did that,
Right.
and that may have helped with cost as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And you left Disney in 2021, right?
Correct. That's correct.
On good terms?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I was just ready to explore and have some new adventures and see what it's like out in the big bad world. I was at Disney for 26 years. Super proud of everything I got to do. I mean, the fact that I can say I was at Disney for 26 years, Disney Animation,
that's huge.
Is like a dream come true for me, because that's what I wanted to do since I can remember, is work in Disney Animation. So I just thought, I think it's time to explore and try some different things, and yeah, my intent was not to storm out of the castle gates, never to return again.
So if they wanted to call upon you again, and they, we got to have another Steve Anderson directed movie, would you go back for that?
I'm always open to all possibilities. Yeah.
Okay, so
you know something?
Huh?
Do you know something?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you had an inside.
No, this is my way of us trying to put it out there. So if maybe someone else is watching this who has a connection to the company, they can go, all right, I thought we were done with that guy, but maybe he's not done with us yet.
Gotcha. Okay, I like it.
Does that mean what's that?
Put the good vibes out there.
That's exactly right. So you're kind of a few years removed now. Does that mean your knowledge of projects in production is like expired, or are you still sitting on some things that you're like, oh, I know they're working on this, or is that up in the air?
It's kind of expired. The last movie that I guess the last movie that I kind of saw begin development was Wish. It was super early, and it was just the very very superficial discussions about doing something for the 100-year anniversary. But yeah, I believe beyond that, I'm like everybody else. I get to see what's coming up, like it's as a new thing. So
the most recent celebration for Donald Duck and the shorts they put out for that, like, you didn't know about those at the time because they happened really close to in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk to people, and sometimes I get little things, but and like my dear friend and former producer, Meet the Robinsons, that I worked with. I directed Meet the Robinsons, and Dorothy McKim was the producer of Meet the Robinsons, and she produced the Donald Duck short that just came out. She
Oh.
produces a lot of those short form content for Disney Plus. So I have breakfast with Dorothy every now and then, and so she did whisper a few things into my ears. But as far as like the big feature projects, I only know what the rest of the world knows. So
Okay.
yeah.
I like anniversaries a lot, and I just thought I'd throw this out there just because I'm going to throw it out there. For whatever reason, there was a film that eluded my view for my entire life. You know how that happens? You're like, yeah, I should have watched that by now. Why haven't I watched that? Well, for me, it was Aristocats.
Oh, yeah.
And it was 8 years ago today that I first saw it.
Wow. And did you like it?
Yeah, I watched it again recently, and I was actually kind of blown away at how solid it is.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with it. It's a very well balanced movie.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the as an animator, I'm sure you have an affinity for all styles of Disney animation, but that sort of late 60s, 70s technique of the Xerox animation, where you're actually seeing the animator's drawings on screen moving. I'm a sucker for that too. So I love films of that era and of the era that we're talking about today.
I would say
for that very reason.
It's probably most visible in that film on Madam.
Yeah, you can like see construction lines.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I mean, if that's all their, show your work kind of stuff, it worked because like the animation on Madam is gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
I have to ask, because I'm sure someone who's watching is thinking this, if you had to name like 3 that you just are your top 3, can you have those at the ready? Are you aware of those?
Yeah, I'd probably say, Pinocchio is the one that I feel like is my favorite animated film of all time. It's just, I am just blown away by the artistry of the film, by the heart of the film. It just transports me to this amazing little animated Italian village, and I just love it. I love everything about it. Then I would probably say Dumbo and 101 Dalmatians are my other 2, because the stories are so tight, super entertaining, great characters, great moments, but not a lot of fat on those movies. Like, they have their story. It's a very simple story, but they tell it, and they tell it really well. And it's I would say a little less plot and more character. Maybe Dalmatians is a little more plot because it's a caper, but you don't feel the plot mechanisms driving the stories. You feel the characters driving the stories, and I feel like that gives them, for me, a much more special feeling. So Pinocchio, Dumbo, and Dalmatians, I think I would say were my top 3. But I mean,
No, right. At some point, it becomes splitting hairs. I know what you mean. A buddy of mine and I, another animator friend, we've been ranking them. We've been watching them in order of their release.
Oh yeah.
And then ranking them, and we've gotten through 20 films so far. So we're a third of the way through, and now we're at a point where we're like, I don't know. I guess this one goes there, and this one goes there.
They all have great things about them. Even the weaker ones, you can always find something to enjoy about them.
100%. So now we're gonna move on to the book. I promised we were gonna get to that. I'm gonna bring the cover on screen here. So it's called Disney in Between, and I have to tell you, I love a good pun. So you chose an animation pun, which is a bit of a deep cut pun, but that's okay. So it's the in between years, but between when Walt was heading the company and after his passing, and then before moving on into the Eisner years, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah.
So hold on, go ahead.
I was going to say, it felt very, I don't know, as I was rolling titles around it, it felt like when I came up with that idea, it felt like the right feeling, because this is such a time of betweenness for the Disney studios, losing Walt, and then sort of wandering in the Hollywood landscape for a while, not really sure what to do, how to move forward. And then as Hollywood changed around them, what is their place in Hollywood anymore? Is Disney relevant to both the 70s Hollywood of the Scorsese's and Coppola's and Easy Riders and all those movies, and then in the 80s with the Lucas and the Spielberg and blockbuster era, what's their relevance within all that? How can they redefine what a Disney movie is? Until finally in 84 when Eisner and Katzenberg came in, and then really not until 85, 86 that they got their toehold and started bringing some major changes. But between those two extremes, to extend the animation metaphor, this is a real in-between time. It's a time of betweenness, of exploring and of creating something new.
It absolutely is a time of creating something new, because what I love about the book, I got to say, I'm not going to ruin too much for people, but I am going to kind of speak in broad strokes here. You really painted a fantastic picture of showing a company trying to basically having an identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And the book starts with Walt dying, which is, as somber of a subject as it is, it's a great way to start a book, because you're just like, oh, our main character is leaving immediately. And in the pages that follow, I have to point out that the book is structured annually. So every chapter is named after a year. That's a fair way to say that.
Yep.
And I love that, because it really does build upon itself. It was one of those things where I found myself wanting to flip to the back just to kind of get a sense of the whole thing. But as I was going through and reading it from the beginning, I didn't really want to skip ahead too much, because the way you've got it built, it feels like a continuous timeline.
That's great to hear. That was really my hope. I sort of looked at it as the Disney Studios is the protagonist of this story. In screenwriting movie terms, you have that term called the inciting incident, which is usually like the first 10, 15 minutes into a story, the thing that incites, the incident that incites, the moment that starts the story going. And Walt's death is pretty much the thing that started the story. So I thought, let's start that. Let's get right into that. Let's begin the book with that disruption. And then let's treat the studio as the character. How is the character dealing with all these obstacles that Hollywood is throwing at them, or that audiences are throwing at them by not seeing their movies? How is this character changing and growing, and how has it become a different character by the end than it was at the beginning? Because I also wanted to make sure it wasn't just a trivia book. I do go through some accounts, production stories and things like that behind the scenes, but I wanted to try to keep it more macro and see how the creative process at the Disney Studios was evolving and changing, and keep it at that level, if that makes sense, as opposed to just, and then they made this, and then they made this, and then they made this, and then they made this.
No, it honestly feels like the way you describe the events that happened to the studio feels like a bunch of people that shipwrecked, or, well, I shouldn't say shipwrecked, but like capsized, a boat that capsizes, and then everyone is in the water and they're all just grabbing for something to hold on to. In this case, a script that maybe was looked at and then just like put to the side, or something that was already set in motion but needed to have some more production time. It felt like the company was like, oh, you work on this, and it's it's really maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because it's, on the one hand, it's very easy to judge those in charge at that time period when Walt was lost, because it's easy to judge them harshly for hanging on to the old ways, clinging to Walt, clinging to the way he used to do things.
Yeah.
Because ironically, in doing so, they violated one of his core principles, which was change, like embracing change, always thinking forward, always thinking, what's on the other side of that hill. Let's keep going forward. At the same time, if I were in their shoes, I think I would be terrified as well. Like, you've now been handed unceremoniously, not by choice, you've now been handed the reins to this company that just has brought so much joy to the world, and was spearheaded by one man who had such a unique way of creating entertainment.
And he had his hand in everything.
Yeah,
That's the part that I think maybe people do know that about him, but to me, it struck me as something that I kind of already had a sense of it, but I don't think I knew just how much that
yeah,
he was going around the studio, essentially spinning the plates to make sure that they didn't fall
yeah,
on literally every aspect, whether it was Disneyland or whether it was the TV shows or whether it was the feature animated productions, or any of those things. He was just going around and making sure that he kind of had an eye on all of it, but he didn't. It seems like he didn't meddle too much. He just sort of was just keeping a watchful eye. Would that be
yeah,
a fair way to say that?
yeah. That's kind of always the way I've heard it explained as well. I mean, I'm sure there are times where he did meddle, but I think for the most part, particularly towards the end of his life, I think he had so much faith in his people that, yeah, he knew that he needed to check in and sort of make sure everything was going okay. And once he felt like, okay, that's stable, I can go on to the next one and make sure that's going well and that's going well. I don't get a sense that he was a micromanager who would actually get in there and say, no, do it like this. You know,
Right.
I
But
don't get that sense.
but here's the interesting thing about that. It's this kind of a dichotomy, I guess I would say, of you have somebody that trusts his people to do the job, and yet the minute he's gone, it's like they all forgot what they were doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's odd because it makes you go, well, I guess he wasn't really an honorary figurehead. I mean, he was, but he wasn't just that. He was keeping the ship pointed in the right direction.
That's right. Yeah, and and again, I can't imagine the fear that must have been going through those people's heads, because many of them were Walt's family members.
Right.
Many
Right.
of them, I mean, they all had their positions because of Walt. So they were either his biological family or they were his entertainment family, his studio family. They were all his family. So
Yes.
an incredible legacy to have to pass on. But unfortunately it took outside people to come in and actually to make the change, because the stasis was happening because the old guard was holding on so tight to Walt. And it wasn't until you got people to come in and go, we got to let go of Walt, that change could really happen.
Do you think, and this is something that I kind of ponder with other friends sometimes, because Mickey Mouse sort of became something that it seems like the company is afraid to do anything with. But that happened when Walt was still alive. So, because like the Mickey Mouse shorts ended in the 50s.
Right.
So it does make me wonder, though, if Walt hadn't passed, what would have become of Mickey then? Have you ever looked into that or wondered about that?
No, that's an interesting question though, because yeah, you're right. He'd sort of retired Mickey from the screen.
Yeah.
Um, Other than
Mickey Mouse Club.
re-release, yeah, Mickey Mouse Club re-releasing some of the like shorts on Wonderful World of Disney or something, or in the
Right.
theaters. But yeah, would he have ever brought him back?
Yeah.
Would there ever have been, in 1983 was Mickey's Christmas Carol, kind of his first film in what, 30 years
Yeah.
at that point? Would there be something like that? Would Walt have said, hey, you know what, it's time to bring back Mickey? Or would he have been, no, I'm really tired of Mickey, let's just keep him in the closet? I don't know.
Do you think or suspect that Walt would have been, since he was such an innovator, do you think he would have been all about the advent of CG?
I think so. I think he would have seen it as, I'm curious as to what he would like, what it would have looked like to him and how he would have used it. I'm not really completely sure, but he really had that ability to see something and see the possibilities in it. and not be threatened by it. Like in the book, for example, we talk about back in the 50s when when television came into being, and all the other Hollywood studios were like, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna kill the movies." Walt was like, "Hey, I'll take it. I'll use it." So, would he have made movies with computer animation? I don't know. Would he have used it more in the parks? Would he have, like, how he would have seen it and implemented it? It's a good question. I'm really not sure, but one way or another, I think he would have seen the potential for sure.
Do you see, and maybe more importantly, when you were at Disney for your 26-year stint, it's not really a stint, it's a career, but anyway, when you were there, do you feel like you saw behaviors reminiscent of the old guard?
Mm.
Without naming names, of course.
Yeah. Think about that for a moment.
Because I feel like there's a little bit of that happening.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there was a reluctance to move from 2D into CG, and this would have been back in the early 2000s or so, 2001,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, somewhere in there.
Yeah. When Dinosaur came out.
Yeah, there was certainly a reluctance, but I didn't ever see anyone say it's not going to happen or try to stop it. I think people were just, obviously, it displaced a lot of artists. A lot of artists lost their jobs because you didn't need certain artists anymore, cleanup artists, in-betweeners, all that stuff. Some animators didn't make the switch into CG, so they had to find a new place for themselves. Led to the shutting down of the Florida studio that was out at Disney MGM Studios. At the time, it was called Disney MGM Studios in Orlando. So it certainly was a big disruption. And there may have been people in other meetings that I was not privy to saying, "We can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this." But I never saw anyone do that.
Okay.
I do kind of wish we could have kept it going in tandem. Like there could have been some way to do both. Unfortunately, I think the two can coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I think that's my only disappointment in that situation. But
with the acquisition of Pixar, it seems the way they're going seems kind of redundant.
Yeah,
it's like, why not be the studio that has traditional films coming out of the primary part of the studio, and then Pixar handles the CG stuff?
Yeah.
Just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So at what point did you say to yourself, okay, this book needs to happen and I am the right guy to write it?
Well, I've been thinking about doing something with this time period for a really long time because, first and foremost, this is the Disney of my childhood. I was born in 1970, so save for the first 4 years of this time period, this is what I grew up with. And so as much as I love the films of Walt's era, I also love the post-Walt era. These were the films I got excited about. These were the new Disney films coming out. So I had such a nostalgia for it that I wanted to do something with it. And I felt like it's always kind of leapfrogged over in the history books. Because it isn't, for the lack of a better word, the sexy time in Disney history. It is a bit, like you said, it's a little dark. It's a little confusing. It's a little uncertain. They had quite a few failures and some grand experiments, but not all of them found an audience at the time. So I understand why the broader history books kind of skip over it, but I felt like it's something needs to be done with this time period because there's too many interesting things that happen to avoid, to keep avoiding it. So it wasn't, I would say it was probably around 2009, 2010. We were working on Winnie the Pooh, and a gentleman that was working with us named Bernie Mattinson was sitting right next to me in the story room. And for those that don't know who Bernie is, Bernie started in 1953 at the studio as what was called a traffic boy. So he was a runner. So he made deliveries all over the lot, including some to Walt himself. Then he went into animation. He was an in-betweener. He was an animator, story artist, produced and directed Mickey's Christmas Carol and The Great Mouse Detective. and then continued after that at Disney as a story artist in the story department. And so we called him our Pooh guru, because Bernie worked on Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree and Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. So we thought, well, we got to have Bernie because he has like the classic Disney sensibilities. So we want to have Bernie on our movie on Winnie the Pooh. And so as I realized, well, Bernie's sitting right next to me, and Bernie has been here since 1953. Who better to start with talking about this time period and trying to figure out, what do I want to do with this? What's the story I want to tell? Than Bernie. So I just started interviewing Bernie. And then that grew to other colleagues of mine at the animation studio who came into Disney during this time period, and then also started reaching out to other live action folks and trying to get that side of the story as well. So not just animation, but live action films. And then gradually I started figuring out, okay, I think this is the story I want to tell. Like, I had some assumptions, but some of those stuck and some of them didn't actually. Some of them were subverted by what a lot of people were telling me. So then it became clear to me that I wanted to do this as a book, because I could do a documentary, but I felt like a book, you can get a little deeper. You can get, your hands a little bit dirtier into the subject matter and get into some more detail about what actually happened. But then a documentary, you kind of have to stay a little bit more on the surface. So
you've been working on it since 2009?
Ish. Yeah. 9, 10 ish.
I mean, that's a good chunk of time to be putting into a book.
Yeah. I was very reluctant to write it for a long time because I just didn't feel like I had enough information.
I will say it's 500 pages. So it does read very easily, though. You've got it broken up in such a way where each of the years are also like broken up within, like, they have like subsections.
Right.
And I have to give you credit also, because I didn't know what to expect going into it, other than it's going to be about the 20-year period,
Yeah.
You kind of tell a story of America in those 20 years. Really, or I should say America's media landscape in those 20 years, because you don't just focus exclusively on Disney. You actually talk about what's happening with the other studios and how their films are sort of taking a look at the culture, and then here's what Disney put out. And I love it because it puts it into such a perspective, because if you watch these films in a bubble, you can walk away with what the narrative is, right? But to really understand what everybody else was kind of getting at the time, they were watching it with a backdrop that was very different than our own right now.
Right.
And how did you decide that you were going to do that? Like, what made you want to go, okay, I could just keep it laser line focused on the studio, but I'm going to broaden it up and look at the whole country.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with the 70s Hollywood, 70s filmmakers, or starting in kind of the late 60s with like Easy Rider, Bonnie and Clyde. Those movies kind of kicked off the new Hollywood, and younger filmmakers began replacing the old guard. It's actually the exact same story that happened at Disney. It just was offset by maybe, 10 some years. But all the old genres were dying out. Musicals were sort of losing their footing. Disaster movies, all those kind of tried and true Hollywood genres. As the world was getting more complex, audiences wanted their movies to reflect that complexity. And that classic Hollywood stuff was very black and white, and it wasn't what audiences were looking for. And so it took younger filmmakers who could see the gray areas in what was going on in life and knew how to translate those into stories and make movies like Easy Rider, like American Graffiti, like Bonnie and Clyde, those films that really, Coppola's films, that really kind of kicked off that new Hollywood. I found it fascinating because, and I talk about it in the book, Easy Rider was such a huge cultural shift and made such an impact. That was 1969 that movie came out. That's the same year that The Love Bug came out. And I find the juxtaposition of those two things really fascinating. Now, I'm not suggesting that Disney should have been making movies like Easy Rider, but it's really interesting. Or another example, 1977, Star Wars was 1977. Pete's Dragon was 1977. I love Pete's Dragon, but it also really shows you how the rest Hollywood was making. In fact, a very Disney kind of movie was Star Wars was, but made for a contemporary audience, made with contemporary technology, you know, and completely connected with the masses. Pete's Dragon, very much an old school Disney thing. Charming, lovely songs, like a lovely movie, but completely out of step with the time period.
You know, it's funny that you brought up Pete's Dragon also, because I like that you also tease that earlier in the book. Like you'll mention, you'll just kind of sneak in, you'll go like, so Pete's Dragon was sort of gonna, was picked up around this time. And then you just kind of leave it there and move on to your next, and you're like, well, why did he mention Pete's Dragon? But it's because you're sort of building this foundation of like, look at how long it took for this to even get to a point where it was produced.
Yeah, that's the other thing I found fascinating too, is how many of the films of the I'd say the first like 3 or 4 years at least after Walt's death, that were films that he had set in motion, or films that were sort of were kind of on the back burner, almost in production but not quite. And then even into 77, you get Pete's Dragon, which Pete's Dragon originated back in the 50s as a TV episode. So they continue to sort of recycle those ideas. Totally. I mean, you can make anything great. So I'm not saying that the idea of recycling it was necessarily a bad thing. But again, an example of how they still had a foot in the past. They were still kind of clinging to anything that Walt had touched.
Was there, did you get exclusive access to archives to make this book, or were you just doing independent research?
I did get to the Pete's Dragon research came from the archives. They generously let me go over there and
was there
a bunch of boxes.
Was there anything when you got to do the research where you were just like, well, that's something I never knew, and just kind of stuck with you as like a hidden gem that people don't know about?
I think for me I'm a huge fan of Pete's Dragon, and so to hear some of the different versions of the story, there are some very odd iterations.
It's also very odd, the version we got.
It is. And
I'm saying that with love and affection for that movie, because I grew up watching that movie as well. But when I sit there and think about what it is, I'm like, yeah, that's that's an interesting one.
Yeah. So I think that was my and I'll let you all read those in the book, because I can't remember them very well right now. That's why I wrote them down. There's some really interesting permutations that the Pete's Dragon story went through that I found fascinating.
Of the animated films that came out in that in between years, do you feel like there's one particular film that maybe gets a bad rap and you're like, it's actually really good, or it's maybe not it's really good as a film, but it's really important because it brought in a certain team of animators, or was a directorial debut for someone? Is there any one film that kind of like rises to your list?
Well, I would say The Great Mouse Detective, for me, number one. That's also a film that I really adore. It's a smaller film. It certainly was not a huge hit back in the day. I think it has a following, but it's also not. It's not going to make most people's top 10 of Disney films. But its importance was huge. Number one, it kicked off the career of John Musker and Ron Clements, who of course went on to direct Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, Moana, and like two of the biggest animation filmmakers that we've had. Number two, it saved Disney animation. It was coming on the heels of The Black Cauldron, which was in 1985. And The Black Cauldron was not a very successful film financially, some would say creatively, as well. And Katzenberg and Eisner did not begin that film. They did not start that film into development, but they came in the year before it was released. And they were very unhappy with it and didn't like it and said basically, this animation thing, this Black Cauldron didn't make money. We don't really know what animation is. We're live action people. Why do we want to keep this going? Why don't we just kill animation and we'll re-release the movies every couple years and just kind of use the library? We'll exploit that. But Roy Disney, Walt's nephew, who had come back to the company at the time, got Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg to hear a pitch of The Great Mouse Detective, directed by Bernie Mattinson, John Musker, Ron Clements, and a man named Dave Mitchner. And they pitched their outline boards to Michael and Jeffrey, and they finished the pitch, and they said, "Thank you very much," and they left. And I think it was like a day or two later, Bernie heard from Roy Disney, and Roy said, "Good thing your pitch landed and that they liked it, because they were going to kill animation, but they're going to keep it alive so you can make this movie." And Great Mouse Detective was made. Ron and John's career kicked off. You had Oliver and Company after Great Mouse Detective, and then after that, you had The Little Mermaid, and the rest. That Renaissance was off and running. So,
although you could make the argument that like Rescuers Down Under sort of is like a little bit of like a bump.
Yeah.
Or not. I don't think it's bad. I like I'm just saying like it's not, no one thinks of that film when they think of the Disney Renaissance.
No, it's true. It didn't quite make the splash that, no pun intended, that Little Mermaid made, or that Beauty and the Beast did after it. But
isn't that funny how what saved animation was a story about a mouse?
Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah,
and actually has a lot of mice stories.
Yeah, and such a little kind of unassuming film. It's just this little caper film about a bunch of talking mice in people suits, basically, which again I totally love, and I just think it's completely charming and lovely. But who would have thought that would have that kind of an impact? But it really, because of Great Mouse Detective, because of that early pitch by those guys, Disney Animation was saved from the chopping block.
Well, I mean, it does make you wonder what it's going to take now, because I do feel like there's a bit of a slump happening again.
Yeah.
And hopefully they're not considering doing any chopping block stuff, but it makes you wonder if behind the scenes there is something happening, and if so, what's going to be the film that resurges it all.
Yeah. It's a bummer, because I still have tons of friends there and love them all dearly, and want nothing but the best for them all. So I wish everybody well. And
I kind of want to point out how interesting, something that struck me when I was reading it was the earlier years when Walt passed, how they decided to go into filmmaking by committee.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very relatable today, actually, because that's exactly, it seems to me like that's what films are being produced as now, is films by committee.
Yep.
And it's just such an interesting thing to see how confident the studio was with Walt. And then as soon as it goes to this committee, you would think, well, we've got all these people that were there when he was alive. They studied under him. They should be fine. But because there were so many cooks in the kitchen, they hit this wave of indecisiveness.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think how to put this delicately, but I think there's a lot of benefit to gathering really creative, smart people together to get feedback as a filmmaker or a writer or an artist, like whatever you're doing, a creative person. Getting feedback is hugely important along the way of creating something, and that's why this whole notion of these kind of creative trusts was born. And so at the heart of it, there's really good things, but it can also turn into this, exactly what you're saying, filmmaking by committee. I did have some issues with that in my years at Disney Features, the last 10 years or so that I was there, because it started feeling like number one, as a filmmaker, you have to appeal to this large group. You have to basically appeal to everybody's sensibilities. So any of the rough edges or kind of unique, quirky things that you brought to your film, they tend to get buffed off and kind of turn into just a little more of a generic product. And me personally, I love being in a room with 3, 4, 5 people tops talking creative stuff and getting feedback. When you get 20, 25 people, 30 people in a room all giving notes, it's tough. It's really overwhelming, and sometimes you just have no clue what you're doing anymore. You just lose sense of it, or I did at least.
Well, it just tells you, I think, that you really do need. I mean, it's an interesting portrayal of the two ways of approaching something, I think, right? You could say let's have somebody who's in charge, who has a vision, and we're going to trust that vision. I'm talking creatively here. I'm not talking like, other parts of society. I just mean like as far as filmmaking is concerned. And then you have the other way of looking at it where it's like where we're going to have all these people put their 2 cents in. And at least with the first example, you may not get something that works, but you at least everyone will know what their job is. And you'll all be on this vessel together going in a direction. The other way, it's just like everybody's doing a tug of war, and you're not really getting anywhere. You're just like you're moving a little this way and then you're moving a little that way, and it's like nothing can really get off the ground that way.
I agree. And again, it may have just been my personal sensibility, just did not jive with that kind of way of working. I'm all for getting feedback.
You're saying that's how it is. You're saying when you were there, that committee approach was still happening when you were there.
Yep.
So it's just funny that's how it happened when Walt dies, and they go into this committee approach, and then it just hasn't left that ever since.
Yeah.
And I know you were saying that the subject matter is a little bit sensitive, but I think that's what makes the book so interesting. Also, is you're talking about stuff that I mean, we're as audience members, okay, like take our you and I take our artistry, proclivities aside, and we're also audience members, right? We're artists because we love being an audience member. There's a little bit of both in that.
Yeah.
And as an audience member, we're just watching the final result. We don't see how the sausage is made all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit, you could say maybe embarrassing, peeking behind the curtain and going like, look at how much, production issues. Take Emperor's New Groove, for example. There's an entire documentary out there about how the production of that film went. And I love the final result, but my goodness, it is a miracle anything came out of that production at all.
Yeah, it is.
And you were a screenwriter on that film. Right?
Story supervisor, yeah.
Story supervisor. So I mean, that had to be scary for you when it was like all of a sudden, nope, we're not doing that anymore, and we're nixing that character, we're cutting that musical number. I mean, did that kind of throw you into a tailspin at the time?
Well, a little bit. I only spent about a couple weeks on the pre-Emperor's New Groove version, the Kingdom of the Sun version.
Yeah.
I was actually trying to get onto another movie, and I just was like, but they said, no, we need your help. And said, okay, fine. But now that the movie's sort of imploding, can I just go work on this other movie? And they said, no, stick around.
So you wanted to jump ship when things were.
And again, to be fair, I wasn't really on that ship much, so I wasn't jumping too far. But the great thing was I got the amazing opportunity, because I stuck around, to be story supervisor on Groove. So I kind of only was involved in the Groove half of that whole story, and the Groove half was really pretty nuts because it was like one of the most yes and movie experiences I've ever been on, where it's just, okay, we gotta make it. Because see, the thing is, they stopped Kingdom of the Sun, the prior movie. They didn't change the release date, so Emperor's New Groove still had to make the release date. So they had 2 years from start to finish to make Emperor's New Groove. So it was like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, what about this? Great, do that. And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Sketch, draw, type, write, board, pitch. Great, send it to editorial, cut it. It was so by the seat of our pants, but it was super fun because of that. You know,
did the studio realize at the end of it that they had made a really good Looney Tunes movie? Because that's what it is.
I heard that one of the executives had said, "Well, we're never going to make another movie like that again."
Oh no!
Yeah, because the feeling was it was so, because it didn't do well at the time. It didn't make any money,
Right.
and the feeling was, well, it's just too niche. It's like it's not. It's a sense of humor that people don't come to Disney movies to see. It doesn't have the, you know, the weight of a Lion King, and it doesn't have the whatever. The feeling was it wasn't what people want to see out of Disney. So, and it has stood. They have never made a movie like that since.
Oh, I've wondered often why they didn't give that attempt another go, because I feel like it's such a great comedy, and animated comedy is, I think it's a great category, but you know, a lot of films that are animated these days end up going into the like adventure comedy.
Right.
Like they don't, I mean, which technically Emperor's New Groove is also that, but I'm saying it really just felt like a buddy comedy movie.
Yeah. Even the adventure sequences are pretty silly.
Right.
So
right. You're not really you know, you're not thinking there's a lot of peril happening. No. You know, you're almost waiting for someone to get hit on the head by a refrigerator and see stars. You know what I mean?
That would not have been weird.
No, it really wouldn't have been. No. Okay, well, I just want to remind everybody. Okay, so the book, once again, is Disney in Between the Lost Years, 1966 to 1986. It is a fantastic read. I do want to also point out that the book is available for pre-order right now from theoldmillpress.com. It's right on their landing page. You don't have to look very far. You just scroll down a little bit, and then the book comes out in September, right?
Yeah, September 10th is the official release, so it'll be out in the world then. And as Phil said, if you go to oldmillpress.com and pre-order the book now, you can pre-order a signed copy.
Oh, great.
As well as you'll get the book before September. You should get the book like by late July.
Okay, who signed it? You?
Me.
Did you sign them already, or
not yet? No.
Okay.
Sometime soon I'll get a couple boxes worth of books.
I mean, we're at the end of June, man. You're going to have to jump on that.
Yeah, true. Oh, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll get my hand
July. Yeah, if they're going to get it in July, they're going to have to get you those to sign soon.
It's going to be one marathon weekend.
I think, yeah, you're going to have to get like a proper wrist guard and all that stuff. Now, is there a book tour planned? What's going on with that?
There's been talk about doing some signings and things. Nothing that's really landed yet, so I probably shouldn't say anything yet. But the idea is to get out there and do some signings and things like that. So
are you coming
more on that to come?
Are you going to come to Austin?
That'd be great. Love to.
Okay, well, let me know if you do, because we'll have to shoot the breeze.
Great.
Well, I'm going to say thank you so much again. This was really, it's a truly fascinating subject, and you handled it really well. It's literally something that I am sitting around going, gosh, I really wish I knew what was going through people's minds when they made this decision, and that's what this book is.
Oh, great! I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much, Phil.
Yeah, my pleasure, Steve. This has been really, really great, and we are going to do some questions. I've got people who are shooting some questions in, and so I was gonna do this a little bit differently, but I like to try to pivot if I have to. So we're gonna go ahead. We're just gonna jump into questions. But thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it, Steve. This is a great conversation, and I appreciate your insights into your period of time at Disney, but also the period that you grew up with.
Great. Thank you, Phil. It's a real joy. I appreciate the opportunity to get to come and chat with you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and do some questions as promised. And so let's go here and dig into the question bag. Question Bag-O-Matic. We got someone named, well, we got some comments and questions. So we've got someone named Brickinator8 saying, crazy that Toy Story 2 was almost completely lost.
Yep.
Anything you want to throw in about that?
Well, it was like almost literally lost, I guess, right? Because there was somebody had erased a drive or something like that.
Yeah.
But it also had the Emperor's New Groove Kingdom of the Sun thing, I believe, because Toy Story 2, I think, was originally going to be like a direct-to-video or something. And then partway through, they completely dismantled it, changed the whole thing, and restarted it. And the movie that came out in theaters was the product of that. So a similar kind of Kingdom of the Sun and Emperor's New Groove thing.
And that was, were you working on Kingdom of the Sun like when Roger Allers was still on it?
Yeah, just the tail end. Yeah, that was really sad.
Yeah, that's
very, very hard time.
It seemed like he took that very personally.
Yeah, he's such a sweet, big-hearted guy that, yeah. It was a very sad time.
Yeah, like I said, if you ever get a chance, if people watching this haven't seen it, there's a documentary called The Sweatbox. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something that Disney wants people to see or not, but it's a really, really good glimpse into how the sausage gets made, I would say. Shailene Smith says, hey, Phil and Steve. Shailene here. 2 questions if you have time. Of all the different roles you've had experience with, which is your favorite? Story supervisor, director, screenwriter, etc.
I really love being a director. That's kind of been my uber goal. Started off loving to draw, wanting to be an animator, love being a story artist, love screenwriting, all that kind of stuff. But I've always enjoyed leadership roles, and there's nothing better to me than getting a group of people together and making something, creating something, collaborating. I just love that. That feeling is such a rush, regardless of even what comes out at the end. Just that experience of, hey, let's put on a show, like those old sitcoms or whatever. I just love that, and so directing is exactly that. It's leading the charge into battle with incredibly talented, passionate, dedicated people behind you, around you, supporting you, and it's just the greatest joy. So that's really my love, is directing.
And that had to be pretty amazing, directing Winnie the Pooh, since Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh was one of your childhood films, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I had when they first said, "Hey, do you want to work on this Winnie the Pooh project?" My first thought was, I don't know. I never really connected to Winnie the Pooh, and then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, "Are you crazy? You used to watch those. You watched those the shorts they played on Wonderful World of Disney all the time. You saw Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. You had Winnie the Pooh jammies. You had Winnie the Pooh record albums. You had Winnie the Pooh storybooks, and like all the Pooh memories like came rushing back to me, and I thought, well, okay, I got to make that. I got to work on this project."
I was kind of thinking about this the other day. Tell me if you think I'm off base on this, but Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is almost like a return to the package films.
Yeah, because it's a collection of existing.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Kind of a weird.
Totally.
Anyway. I just thinking about that. Shailene also says, I'm tenaciously chasing my own dream of telling stories through feature animation. So in retrospect, I'm curious what advice you'd give to yourself at the beginning of your journey.
I've struggled my whole life and career with feeling afraid to make a mistake, afraid to make a bad drawing, afraid to make a movie that people didn't like, afraid to disappoint a director with the sequence that I pitched, whatever it might be. And so a lot of my journey has been to let go of that fear and to take the pressure off of myself and to just enjoy the experience of creating. So I would say take the pressure off yourself. If you do a drawing you don't like, you just put another piece of paper over it and do it again. Or you just delete it on your whatever and draw it again. Or you can put another layer over top and, turn the opacity down and draw over it. you make a movie that somebody didn't like, you'll make another movie that somebody will like. Or there's always going to be somebody out there that does like it. There's going to be at least one person that you connect to. Take the pressure off yourself. Let go of that fear. It's easier said than done, because I think we're all, at some level have a fear of failure. But the greatest enemy of creativity is fear. Fear of making a mistake. So to be the healthiest creative person that you can, let go of that fear, take the pressure off yourself, and just enjoy the act of creation.
I have to echo that, Steve. One of my fondest memories from college, I had a really awesome drawing instructor named Mike Willie, and we were in a drawing class one day, and Mike would just, like, I can't remember what we were doing, a still life or doing something, and he was walking around the class, and he would stop by each student kind of from behind their shoulder and see what they were doing, and then give his 2 cents. And I had, if memory serves, I had nothing on my page. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just trying to decide where to put this line, because I can see in my head that if I put it there, it's going to do this, and if I put it there, it's going to do this." And he was like, "Well, you can't judge any of it until there's a line on the paper."
Yes. Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. And I to this day, I will still have that problem, but I will then remember that conversation from college and go, just put something down, because you think what it's going to look like in your mind's eye, but you don't really until you can't judge it really until it's in front of you.
100%. What a great teacher. Great words of wisdom. It's so true.
Absolutely. So Brickinator 8 says, "OMG, I love Meet the Robinsons."
Hey, me too.
And I forgot to say earlier, I also love Meet the Robinsons.
Awesome. Thank you.
I feel like it's a film that really does kind of get overlooked, but it really does succeed in having that heart that I think a lot of Disney films, that a lot of the best Disney films are the ones that have that heart. I think that movie has that ultimately.
Thank you. That was definitely something we wanted to bring to it. So thanks for that. Thank you, Brickinator 8.
Did you know at the time that you were making the T-Rex, I have a big head and little arms, did you know that was going to be something that would somehow be the thing that survives that movie?
No, and only because they put it in the trailer. I think it really, it became, there wasn't a thing as going viral back then, but that, because it was in the trailer, it got stuck in everybody's heads and became a thing. But you never know. These things just never know. Would you say that's the film that you are happiest to have been a part of, or is there a different one, or are they all your kids? They're all my kids, but Robinsons was certainly a lot of. It was very special for many reasons, but I would definitely say that's
up there.
One that really has my heart.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Sometimes I'm a little bit glad when something doesn't do super well, because then it means they won't make a sequel.
It can just live on its own.
Yeah, just leave it alone.
Franchised or anything.
What's that?
Doesn't have to be franchised or.
No, but what's funny is Emperor's New Groove ended up getting that way anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
They ended up doing that direct-to-video sequel, and then they did an animated series, and it's like, well, for a movie that didn't do well, they sure did decide to return to the well a few times.
That's true. Yeah.
Brickinator says it's kind of like a wacky animated Back to the Future, which also has my heart. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. That's great. Thank you, Brickinator.
Who doesn't want a animated wacky Back to the Future? I think we're long overdue. Anyway, well, this is really great, Steve. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much again.
Yes, thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks to the viewing audience tonight, of course. And if you're watching this after the live stream, still thank you for your comments and in the chat there, and any thumbs ups and subscribes and all those good things you do. I really appreciate that. Please go check out theoldmillpress.com and pre-order your signed copy of Disney In Between. Steve, thank you again.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks, everybody.
Well, this was awesome. I'm really glad to have been able to be given this opportunity tonight. It's been a little while since I did a Stay Tuned live, and thankfully I did not completely forget how to do it. So I thank you for your thank you for your patience, and maybe there'll be some more coming out later this summer. This was part of the Stay Tuned summer reading series, where we kind of focus on books that are animation related or animation adjacent, and this was definitely 100% animation related. So thanks again so much, everybody. Have a great night. I'll see you on the next one.